Hello and welcome to the Sabbath Gift. For those of you guys that are joining us for the first time, my name is Trent. This is my lovely wife, Erin. And we are so excited to have you with us, joining us as we discover the gift of the Sabbath and how it can be a blessing. Now, for our first-time viewers, please, I encourage you, go back and revisit our previous two talks. We had Dr. Christiana share with us about the health benefits of the Sabbath, which was very cool. And also we had Dr. Brendan who shared with us about how to disconnect from the busy world and how the Sabbath helps us to have that disconnect. But for those of you who have been joining with us this whole time, welcome. We're excited today as we're going to learn about how to connect, belong, and rediscover true community. So I hope you guys can enjoy as we learn this. But it's interesting because we actually had a question last week with Dr. Brendan about how social media, can that give us a deep relationship? So it'd be interesting to see if we can learn more about that topic tonight with community. But Erin, where are we tuning in from right now?
So we're actually tuning in not from where we were last week and the week before in Lake Macquarie, Australia, but we are tuning in from Wanaka, South Island, New Zealand.
Yeah.
So a very beautiful corner of our South Pacific division that we've had the privilege of exploring for the last week and the next week as well. So we absolutely loved Christchurch and heading to Queenstown this weekend.
Yep.
And today we had a very special trip on a heli hike at Fox Glacier, which was a total enjoyment. So we would love to know in the chat line, where are you guys tuning in from today? Now, if you do need assistance listening to tonight's presentation, you are welcome to jump onto our Zoom platform. The meeting ID is on the screen below, and please select captions, and that will enable you to really enjoy the fullness of tonight's experience.
But as we said, we've already had two talks. And last week, as I said, and shared with us about disconnecting. Now, Erin, what were some of your highlights from last week?
Brendan's a very smart man, and I really appreciated his consumer equation. He was talking about how time equals money, which equals things, which equals happiness. And this is the consumer equation.
But I actually loved how he talked about the Sabbath interrupts that equation. It actually takes the idea that time equal money equals things does not equal happiness, that we actually need to step away from that view.
Yeah, and that the Sabbath is really an opportunity to have guilt-free time investing in relationships.
Yeah, and then also this idea that it allows us to step away from the constant need to like manufacture and gain things, but also to just engage in creation in nature.
Absolutely. We've got some happy Sabbaths coming on through. Hello, Sharon. Lovely to have you here joining us. We are so excited to be able to spend this evening together in community, which is what our talk is all about tonight. So for those of you who did take up the Sabbath challenge last week, we are super keen to hear what you got up to. Pop it in the chat and let's connect tonight.
But also use the chat function with us so we can find out if there's any questions you want answered. As our speakers share with us tonight, you might find something you want more information about. Please put it into the chat so we can ask that question in our Q&A later on tonight.
Absolutely. This is completely live. So our two speakers for tonight, let us introduce them to you. Nathan Brown is a book author and he's also a book editor at Science Publishing. So Nathan, awesome to have you presenting tonight. And you are presenting with Pastor Moise Stiles, who is planting a Crosswork Church in Melbourne, Victoria, as well as being a chaplain down there for uni age students and the aged care. Guys, it's so good to have you here tonight. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. It's great to be with you all.
We hear you guys are also doing a podcast. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
You want to talk about that, Nathan?
Well, we've spent lots of time talking together and even talking together for at least the notional idea that somebody else might be interested in listening. So we do a podcast on the Adventist Peace Radio podcast. We've done a series within that larger podcast called Moy and Nathan Go to School, and reflecting on the studies that both of us have been doing over the past couple of years and exploring even some of the ideas that we'll be talking about this evening.
Awesome. Well, you're doing another podcast as well. As a follow-up.
Series on that same podcast, yeah. So if you look up the Adventist Peace Radio podcast, you can hear much more of Moy's voice, much more of my voice, and all sorts of other people that we talk to from time to time as well.
Fabulous. So we are so looking forward to your presentation tonight. Over to you guys.
Thank you.
Thank you. And welcome to everyone that's joining us tonight. I guess before we kickstart what we have been tasked with tonight, we firstly want to acknowledge our God and Savior Jesus Christ. We also want to acknowledge our Lord because he's our creator, provider, and supreme owner of all things. And as a practice that we have become a bit more acquainted with of late, we also respectfully acknowledge the Wurundjeri people, which are part of the Kulin Nation, where both Nathan and I are tuning in from. But we also want to pause and say we acknowledge the country of wherever it is that you're tuning from, whether that is any of country here in Australia or across the South Pacific or wherever in the world. We want to acknowledge our Indigenous people there as well, who are the traditional custodians of the land in which you live and I live. We pay tribute to elders past and present and acknowledge that they have cared for this country over countless generations. We recognize the continuing contribution that the Wurundjeri people make to the life of this region and pray that we can work together to leave a legacy of reconciliation, justice, and hope for all future Australians, as well as future generations of the places in which you are living. So welcome. Nathan.
Very cool. So part of the study that Moy and I have been doing over the last couple of years has involved getting into the idea of human rights. And part of that, we were going through the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which includes all sorts of things that, as a wider world, we've agreed are significant to what it means to be human and what it means to live well as a human being. But there are a couple of articles from the Universal Declaration of Human Rights that caught my attention, particularly in the context of this conversation. The first one is Article 23, which says in its first clause, everyone has the right to work. And it continues on with some more detail there. Article 24, the next thing, everyone has the right to rest and leisure, including limitation of working hours and periodic holidays with pay. And as someone who's been fascinated and very intrigued with this idea of Sabbath, that immediately said Sabbath is actually recognised as a part of what so much of our world agrees is human rights, these things that help us to live well. And in studying this and looking at where human rights came from until it recognised in this form in 1948, I, as part of a subject I was doing last year as part of a master's program, spent some time studying the Jewish background of human rights, and particularly in that context, Sabbath. And of course, in the Hebrew scriptures, what Christians often refer to as the Old Testament, the commandments set out this idea of Sabbath. But there was also part of the legal and social regulations of what was being established as a new nation. And so in Exodus 20, this command for Sabbath as one of the almost the constitution of this new nation was, remember to observe the Sabbath day by keeping it holy. And there's a couple of other details there. It's actually one of the most detailed of the 10 commandments there. But there's a specific clause towards the end of it that says, on that day, no one in your household may do any work. So you're to observe the Sabbath, but also no one in your household may do any work. This includes you, your sons and daughters, your male and female servants, your livestock, and any foreigners living among you. And I just think this is an amazing idea, and that this is a unique idea in ancient religions. And so I really want to spend a few minutes just looking at this idea of Sabbath as a religious and spiritual practice, but also as a social practice, and particularly a practice of equality. And rather than I think this is a really significant thing, even in what Sabbath is. So many of the ancient religions had this idea that their faith was built around holy places. So you had to make a pilgrimage to get to a particular place. And even many religions today have some of this same idea, that you make a pilgrimage to a place that is special or has something invested in it that makes it holy. But Sabbath was different. Sabbath was time. And so Sabbath, which is the first thing in the Hebrew scriptures that is called holy, in the creation story, is a really significant thing because time is accessible to us all. And in the way Sabbath works, it actually comes to us. So it's almost the reverse of a lot of other religious practices. It's not something that we can control. It's not something that can be, that we can build a fence around it and charge people admission, or that we will fight over. It's something that simply comes to all of us. One of the rabbis, Abraham Joshua Herschel, described Sabbath as a sanctuary in time, a truce in all conflicts, personal and social, peace between man and nature, and peace within us. So rightly understood, Sabbath is this practice of peace and equality. Herschel continues to talk about that there are really few ideas in the world of thought, which contains so much spiritual power as the idea of Sabbath. And another commentator who I read about this, he made the comment, no ancient society before the Jews had this kind of day of rest. Often it was the rich and the powerful who would celebrate a day off or a day of religious festival. But this was something that was set into the DNA of this nation, that there would be a day off for the poorest people. They were the ones that got the special mention in the people that worked the hardest. They were the ones that got the day off. And this wasn't an accident. It's also repeated in the Hebrew scriptures in Exodus 23:23. For 6 days you are to work, but on the seventh day you are to rest, so that your ox and donkey can rest, son and foreigner can be renewed. It's bizarre how specific that is, but I think that's really important. One author whose book I really appreciate, Sigve Tonstad, who wrote the book The Lost Meaning of the Seventh Day, says that there's really no parallels in other cultures for this Sabbath mandate. Describing the Sabbath, he explains that this commandment prioritizes from the bottom up and not from the top looking down, giving first consideration to the weakest and the most vulnerable members of society. Those who need rest the most, the slave, the resident alien, and the beast of burden, are singled out for special mention. In the rest of the seventh day, he writes, the underprivileged, even mute animals find an ally. And so this is a pretty significant kind of thing, and a unique. And I would actually say, from the study that I did and the paper that I ended up writing on this, that this was one of the earliest examples in all of world history that we can see a contribution to this idea of that there are human rights that should be respected for all people. In the Jewish thought, so much time it was often looked at the other way, that it was a responsibility placed on the people with power, the people that were the employers, to actually give their people a day off, as the Sabbath commandment puts it. But I think there's more to it than this, in that once a week there's this practice that would recalibrate the whole of society, something with greater practice of equality and benefits for other people. And so that while the work mandated for the other 6 days of the week is important, it is the seventh day that is transformative. And in turn, this must reprioritize and inform the work of the other 6 days. Quoting Rabbi Herschel again, in Jewish thought, all the days of the week must be spiritually consistent with the seventh day. The Sabbath is one day, but the spirit of Sabbath, particularly in this sense of equality, should permeate all our days. And it's an interesting thing that while it's often throughout history it was kind of rejected and then largely displaced amid some of the anti-Jewish sentiment in the early Christian era, Sabbath is an almost forgotten spiritual practice that could actually change the world and could very much change our communities and the way we live together as people. As another writer put it, the Sabbath is surely one of the simplest and sanest recommendations any God has ever made. Over to you, Moy. Turn yourself on, Moy.
That would be much more helpful. Hey, can you hear me now? Oh dear. This is one of those things where I said I need to actually make sure I unmute myself. So Nathan has kind of given you this sort of background to the Hebrew practice of Sabbath. And one of the things that I've been thinking a lot about since being tasked with talking about this, and Nathan's already mentioned the command, for those of you who probably aren't familiar with the Sabbath practice. So both Nathan and I are part of a faith tradition that practices Sabbath. And one of the things that I have grown up really appreciating is being able to stop on Sabbath. And Sabbath, in the command that Nathan was talking about, I have grown up with this idea that it's, you get to bring people together. We do the whole worship thing. But one thing that I have really appreciated in the depth of Sabbath for me over the last few years is how Sabbath actually connects the weary, the sick, the oppressed to God and also to community. And I guess that's kind of the topic for tonight. I am thinking about the work of Jesus when he was here on earth, that one of the things that Jesus was in trouble for a lot was when he would practice Sabbath in a way of healing people. I'm thinking of the crippled woman that he got to heal on Sabbath, and how and it says that on Sabbath, Jesus was teaching in one of the synagogues, and a woman was there who had been crippled by a spirit for 18 years. And she was bent over and could not straighten up at all. And when Jesus saw her, he called her forward and said to her, "Woman, you are set free from your infirmity." And then he put his hands on her, and immediately she straightened up and praised God. There was this healing thing that took place, and it was one of the very core things that Jesus did on Sabbath. But the reality is, not everybody were happy with the fact that Sabbath became a healing space for Jesus. And it's interesting that they actually said to Jesus, you've got 6 days to work, and yet you're healing on Sabbath. That's not to be done. And I love the way that Jesus answered, and he says, and this is quite a rebuke of them, and he says, "You hypocrites. Doesn't each of you on the Sabbath untie your ox or donkey from the stall and lead it out to give water? Then should not this woman, a daughter of Abraham, whom Satan has kept bound for 18 long years, be set free on the Sabbath day from what bound her?" And I've been thinking about this idea on how Sabbath is a time, as Nathan has mentioned, not only in an ancient practice, but it's also a practice of healing. It is a time where, we bring so much to this day, and whatever infirmities that people have, Jesus taught that it is okay to expect that there is a healing that comes from this gift. And it is a gift that is given to all people, and it is a connecting point. Another part of the Gospels, I guess the sacred texts that Christians have used and we use as a way of teaching and for us in learning from, as far as this idea of Sabbath. In Luke 14, 1-6, again, Jesus was at dinner in one of the leaders' homes, and there was a man there whose arms and legs were swollen. And Jesus asked the Pharisees and experts in religious law, and he says, "Is it permitted in the law to heal people on the Sabbath day or not?" And when they refused to answer, Jesus touched the sick man and healed him and sent him away. Again, one of the things, and I didn't grow up with this idea because, and I don't know why I didn't grow up with that, but one of the things I have really appreciated more and more as I have grown in a deep gratitude and an appreciation for Sabbath is this idea that Sabbath is so much more than what we give credit for. And that is, there is this healing that is taking place because people get to practice this. Now, one of the things I was thinking about is that Jesus healed on the Sabbath. And I wonder if people, when they practice Sabbath, whether there is this expectation that healing will take place as part of this practice. And I wonder if we actually understand that as part of this gift, that this is the kind of thing that Jesus and God can actually do, not only for our physical being, but also in our emotional, our psyche, and all that is made up of being human. What is it that that is needed in the healing space for all of us? Another one of my favorites is found in Luke chapter 6, verse 6-11. Again, on another Sabbath day, a man with a deformed right hand was in the synagogue while Jesus was teaching. The teachers of religious law and the Pharisees watched Jesus closely. And if he healed the man's hand, they planned to accuse him of working on the Sabbath. But Jesus knew their thoughts, and he said to the man with the deformed hand, "Come and stand in front of everyone." So the man came forward, and then Jesus said to his critics, "I have a question for you. Does the law permit good deeds on the Sabbath, or is it a day for doing evil? Is this a day to save life or to destroy it? I love that question. And so it's a question that I've also now come to ask and also expect. Is the Sabbath as a gift, a day in which people come to expect good things to happen, like healing, like burdens being lifted? Is it the kind of day that transforms lives? And I actually believe it does. It's one of my favorite days. And when I think about the teachings of Jesus in this regard, I get excited. And I don't know for you who's listening in, and maybe this is a very new teaching for you. I can tell you without a doubt in my mind that in practicing Sabbath and receiving this idea of Sabbathing, you can expect that your life will change, that healing can take place. Just in conclusion with this thought on the teachings of Jesus, I think that Sabbath as a gift is good news to the sick. It is good news to the oppressed and those who have been enslaved. In Matthew chapter 11, verse 28 to 30, and I love this version from Eugene Peterson. And this is the context of Sabbath. And the question is asked, are you tired, worn out, burnt out on religion? Come to me. Get away with me and you'll recover your life. I'll show you how to take real rest. Walk with me and work with me. Watch how I do it. Learn the unforced rhythms of grace. I won't lay anything heavy or ill-fitting on you. Keep company with me and you'll learn to live freely and lightly. The Sabbath was made for man and not man for the Sabbath. I really love that phrase. And that was a phrase that Jesus actually gave, because Sabbath is a gift that connects you and me to community. It's a day that brings healing. It's a day that actually is good news for you who is weary and burnt out from whatever it is that life throws at you. I can tell you that the teachings of Jesus says that Sabbath is a kind of time and space that is carved out to connect and to connect people to each other, but also connect people to a practice, to a higher being. And maybe this is new, and I hope it's good news for you, because it certainly is meant to be good news for everybody. But most importantly, those who have been oppressed, who've been burnt out, who've been enslaved or sick that's needing healing. The gift of Sabbath is for you. And I'd love to, discuss that some more, Nathan, if you're up for that. So I love it.
Yeah,
so I could
definitely
get preachy, but I'm excited.
And I think one of the applications from this is to just, the last couple of weeks we've talked about the Sabbath benefits, and, we had some great presentations from Brendan and the other lady whose name I'm struggling to remember.
Yada.
That's her, yeah. I really appreciated what they shared and the benefits that come to us. But I think that the extra step we're taking with this evening is, how can the Sabbath benefit others? If we're going to practice Sabbath, how do we use that for the benefit of people in our community? What are the things that can make our community a better place because we are Sabbath keepers here in it?
100%. I was actually thinking about that. I mean, I know I wanted to really stick with the gospel teachings of Jesus when it comes to Sabbath. I was just thinking about how exciting it is that, as for people who do practice Sabbath, that the outflow of the healing that takes place because you practice Sabbath is that you get to also then offer that kind of healing. You get to actually offer liberation and freedom to people. And what a phenomenal opportunity and a gift, really, that I think we don't often think about. Like the question that he asked, the religious leader, do you not untie your donkey as well? Like, how much more is there a need for us to unbound people? And that's kind of the gift of Sabbath to those who practice it, because not only is it beneficial for you, but beneficial for those that you come in touch with, get in contact with. Anyway.
So the people that we have some kind of influence with, that we interact with through the week, day by day, whatever that might be, how can we use our practice of Sabbath to be a gift to them? And I think that's it's a really challenging idea. How can we even be creative with that? What that might look like is do whatever we do on the day for our benefit, but also be concerned about the world. The topic last week was talking about Sabbath as a day to disconnect from the world. I think when we take it from this other angle, it's actually a day then to reconnect with the world in a new way. So both with our practice of Sabbath, but also with Sabbath as that recalibration of our relationships with the people around us, that we reconnect. We step back into the world from Sabbath with a different attitude, a different way that we live our lives, and a concern for the needs of others around us.
Yeah. I would love to hear from those of you who are tuning in. And by the way, I'm so excited you're here. What are your thoughts on this idea that Sabbath brings healing, but also not only for us who practice, but we have an opportunity to bring healing to others? Like, what are your thoughts on that? Would love to hear.
So I have one extra idea just to finish off and wrap up our presentation-y bit, and then Erin and Trent can jump back in, and we can talk about any other questions that we might have. But the other thing that I think, and we've talked about this in the context of social justice, one of the burdens that we kind of have at times when we start to focus on the needs of others is also that we need to have Sabbath as a resource for doing good in the world.
Yes.
That we can't simply take the burden on ourselves of always wanting to, our calling is to serve the world, but not to save the world. And so we need to, Sabbath gives us a space in even all the good works we might be doing, that the world isn't our responsibility, it's ultimately God's. And so I just wanted to finish off this presentation a bit with one of my favorite quotes about Sabbath. And I've had this kind of one of these things in my head, on my wall, in my mind for the last 20 or so years since I first read the book. And it's from a book simply called Sabbath by Wayne Muller. And he describes Sabbath in this way. The old wise Sabbath says, stop now. As the sun touches the horizon, take the hand off the plough, put down the phone, let the pen rest on the paper, turn off the computer, leave the mop in the bucket and the car in the drive. There is no room for negotiation, no time to be seduced by the urgency of our responsibilities. We stop because there are forces larger than we that take care of the universe, and while our efforts are important, necessary and useful, they are not, nor are we, indispensable. Somehow manage without us for this hour, this day, and so we are invited, nay commanded, to relax and enjoy our relative unimportance, our humble place at a table in a very large world. The deep wisdom embedded in creation will take care of things for a while.
That's so beautiful. John Mark Comer also quoted that one on Wednesday.
Stop. There you go. Cool.
Powerful quote, guys. Thank you for your presentations.
Yeah, thank you so much, guys. That quote was an amazing way to finish off. Really appreciated that. But we also had some amazing interactions in the chat.
We did. I'm just going to show a couple of them now that came through as you guys were talking. We didn't want to really throw you off in your presentations, but we just want to do a big shout out to these guys. So good to have you joining here. And we'd love to hear from you who are listening. How does keeping the Sabbath benefit your community? Because that's a really good question. And I just, I really resonate with that. How does the community benefit from me keeping the Sabbath?
It takes it a next step, and it stops it being so much about me, but about others as well. It's not so much self-focused. And I loved that thought. Really appreciated that. I also love the social justice idea and how it's a human right, the Sabbath. I thought that was a really cool approach. I'd never thought about it like that, and really appreciated that idea.
And that in saying to keep the Sabbath, God was protecting the underprivileged, the vulnerable, and even the mute animals. That those who couldn't advocate for themselves were protected by this commandment.
That God goes beyond, like he was unique to his time. Like in that time of the Israelites, there was no other God that would do those sorts of things or make those kind of statements for these people and care about the the ones that couldn't look after themselves. I really loved that you brought that forward, how much God cared for everyone else.
And Moy, that powerful paraphrase of the Bible text where it says, learn the unforced rhythms of grace, that in fact Sabbath is a healing gift, that it's something that blesses. It's not a task, not a list of don'ts, but in fact a list of do's and a gift and a benefit. So just gorgeous. What was the Bible reference for that text that you read
that's
out?
Matthew. Yeah, the Matthew 11:28-30. It's the one where Jesus talks about like, my yoke is easy. And I guess this is a paraphrase from Eugene Peterson about, and I love that idea of the unforced rhythm of grace. I think it's just,
And in that way, I think Sabbath really is a practice of grace because it simply comes to. And I think that last quote as well, that, and even what I took, the contrast we made between holy places and holy time, is that I really like, the practice that I grew up with of Sabbath simply starting at sunset. It's not a time finished. It's a time that says it's time to stop. You don't wait till you ask. It just happens to you. And at our best, we pause and acknowledge that perhaps, and it changes the kind of time we're inhabiting. But in a big picture, it's something that is so accessible. Wherever you are in the world, you know that on that day on the calendar when the sun sets, that you're in a different kind of time. And particularly in Abraham Joshua Herschel's book, The Sabbath, he spends a lot of time talking about that privilege and the palace in time kind of idea that we simply get our in this week by week. It's a great image.
There's a beautiful comment that's just come through the chat and really talking about the need to look forward to the Sabbath all week. So it's not just something that comes and bookends the end of the week, but it's something that you're anticipating and looking forward to and planning for. I know growing up, we were often cleaning the house on a Friday afternoon to get ready for the Sabbath and cooking and all that kind of thing. So there was a real anticipation. It's like looking forward to Christmas, really.
I also loved how you were talking about the Sabbath state of mind and about equality and the gift that it can be for how can I be a gift to my community kind of thing, but that it's a mindset that needs to come not only just on the Sabbath, but something that we can carry through the entire week. It's not just a one day, but 7 days. I really appreciate it.
I was just thinking it's the outflow of our Sabbath practice, really, that the seventh day healing and the seventh day connection and the gift that Sabbath is experienced by, through that 24 hours actually then is practiced throughout the week. And I think it's the gift that keeps on giving, really.
Yeah.
And you can imagine even in the Sabbath commandment, that picture of if you give your, in that kind of old ancient thing, you give your animals the day off, you give your servants the day off, because that's what you were told to do. It's how you relate to those people and those animals even on the next day when you get back to work. It's a transformative. It transforms all our human relationships and interactions in that way.
On that, I have a question for you guys. Just want to jump into a question. I know you guys answered a lot for us with your own little Q&A, but there was a question: if the Sabbath is a human right, something that we are all welcome to and should all be able to have, what are some practical ways we could equip someone who has a boss that doesn't appreciate the Sabbath or doesn't look at it as being something that is a right to everybody, for them to approach their boss and say, hey, I want to start keeping the Sabbath? Do we have any way that we could help them?
I mean, one of the things that I think is great here in Australia is there's actually a huge respect for religious rights. And so that is one of the things that Australia actually respects. So on one hand, that's the easiest thing. That's the easiest route you could go in. But the other one is Australia also as a community and society appreciates well-being, and Sabbath practicing is a well-being necessity. Just from that alone, just off the top of my head.
Yeah, well, I mean, there is that other article, and I can't remember the exact number. I think it might be number 18 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which talks about religious freedom for religious and religious worship. And so that is a part of the human rights equation as well. That's something that I know our faith community has been a significant champion for in different places around the world. So that's, I think, something really significant, and something that we should be alert to and concerned with. And certainly if there are people facing those challenges, there are people that specialise in that kind of advocacy and that kind of lawyering that if it needs to go far. So there are places that you can get advice if that's a particular challenge that you're facing.
Cool.
Guys, we just wanted to say such a big thank you for sharing tonight to both of you, Nathan and Moy. It's just been a pleasure to hear your perspectives and the research that you've done and the reading that you've done as well, drawing on all those different authors and different areas of the Bible that really do reference this so thoroughly.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
But for our listeners, we are here to challenge you to take up the Sabbath challenge and to keep it for yourself. Erin, what does the Sabbath challenge look like?
So the Sabbath challenge is all about using each Saturday, Friday night sunset to Saturday night sunset for the whole month of July to take a Sabbath off. So that means doing something like getting outside and going for a walk, reading a book, finding a Sabbath-keeping church. And if you need help finding a Sabbath-keeping church, have a look at the screen here. We've got a website that can help you locate one near you. But it's really taking time to connect with each other, with creation, with God, and experiencing the gift that it is. And just trying for the month of July. However, we feel that you may want to continue after that once you've experienced it as well. And also using that opportunity to serve, like we've talked about tonight. How can Sabbath be a service opportunity, a healing opportunity for the community around us as well as ourselves?
And I loved how Nathan shared, it's not about us saving, but us serving. And so it's a great way for us to think outside of ourselves and how we can help others and be a blessing to others. But for you guys listening, we'd love you guys to interact again with the chat. Throw up, what are you going to be doing for your Sabbath day tomorrow?
We are keen to hear. And next week, join us at 7 p.m. for our final installment of the Sabbath Gift. This is number 4 out of 4. Go back and watch the others if you've missed out. But Pastor Robbie Bergenin, who's on Faith FM, he's going to be sharing with us about Sabbath and the Bible. So the spiritual purpose and practical implications of keeping the Sabbath. So we are really looking forward to that next Friday night at 7 p.m. as well.
So we look forward to seeing you all there. And we once again just want to thank Moy and Nathan for your time and for your talk. Thank you so much, guys. And we hope you all have a blessed Sabbath.
See you.